Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. The HiT cast offers a weekly look at Hollywood from a conservative point of view. Sick of media bias infecting Hollywood headlines? Tired of stars insulting your views? HiT has your back. Now, here's your host, Christian Toto.
Welcome to episode 56 of the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. This week we're speaking with Nico Perrino, the host of the So to Speak, the Free Speech podcast. He's on the front lines in the battle for free speech, and he's got some really cool updates you won't want to miss. This week's show is sponsored by the Oprah for President campaign, a born leader who will give us a new car in every pot. Before my chat with Nico, I wanted to explore Trump's impeachment, or rather Hollywood's obsession with the possibility. Not one but two upcoming shows feature arcs that will focus on presidents' challenge for their mental instability. Sound familiar? The Good Fight on CBS All Access is gearing up for a dramatization of what a Trump impeachment might just look like. Over at Madam Secretary, the storyline doesn't really directly involve Trump, but the show's creators say, hey, we came up with this months and months ago, but hey, the fact that it mirrors the news headlines today, or what we want the news headlines of today to be, that ain't so bad. I guess the big question is, will viewers tune in or tune out? What's clear is that many of the stories from today's TV shows are just absolutely obsessed with Trump, and I wonder how dated they may be in the very near future. Supergirl, with all the talk of the resistance, well, that's just one of many examples. The great site Newsbusters comes up with example after example every week, if not every day. Please check it out. You know, content today has a very long shelf life thanks to home video, streaming, different channels. It's repeated over and again. And long-running shows that are in production right now are going to be watched again and again over time. I'm really curious, will these Trump-obsessed shows age badly? Are audiences really going to want to watch in 5 or even 10 years shows that really dig into the news of the day? Or they say, hey, I don't get that. I don't connect with it. Life has moved on. I'd rather have stories that have aged better or just stories that are evergreen in tone. Only time will tell. One thing that's clear, Hollywood's obsession with all things Trump isn't slowing down. In fact, it might be hotter than ever in 2018, all the while the economy continues to boom.
Don't touch that dial. You're listening to my daddy's podcast.
Here's the celebrity tweet of the week. This week's honor goes to Judd Apatow, the great comedy director behind Knocked Up and the 40-Year-Old Virgin, but it's not for the usual reasons. Now, Judd didn't really tweet anything crazy this week that I know of. Well, why don't I know it? Shouldn't I know all about the latest Hollywood tweets? Well, he blocked me on Twitter. Why? I don't know. I really don't know. I've actually praised him a number of times on Twitter over the last year or so, and of course I'm sure I've been critical a time or two. Lately, I don't think I've mentioned him or even thought about him over the last 2, 3, 4 weeks, but he blocked me all the same. So this week's celebrity tweet honor is dedicated to Judd Apatow and his thin skin. Now, if he tweets something crazy down the road, you'll just have to let me know about it.
You're listening to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment.
My hit tip of the week is Creep 2. Both films in this indie horror series follow the found footage formula. I hate the found footage formula. I wish it could get a stake driven right through its heart. But you know what? I did give the first one a try a couple of years ago. Thought it was pretty interesting. I was engaged until that final shot, which was rather creepy. The sequel smartly builds on that, and I think you really have to see both films together to get the full appreciation of it. The story follows a fledgling YouTube star who agrees to shoot our fellow creep who claims to be a serial killer. We know the real deal. Does the YouTube star know it? Now, credit Mark Duplass, the star of the film, for bringing something new to your typical killer. You know, I think he's not a great actor, but in the right role, he's rather effective. Now, this isn't for gorehounds. There's not a lot of blood and guts, so if that's your thing, stay away. And it's still kind of slight when you think about it in the big picture, but there's a real clever approach here, and it really kind of bypassed my hatred for found footage formula movies. I thought it was a real treat, especially for horror movie fans who want something a little bit different. Creep 2 is available right now on Netflix. Now let's get to my chat with Nico Perrino. Anyone who obsesses over free speech like Nico does has all my respect. He does more than that, though. Through his work at FIRE, that's the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, he keeps tab on colleges where free speech is under attack. It's just one of the group's many missions. His show, So to Speak, the Free Speech Podcast, extends that conversation in some really fascinating ways. If you want to know what's happening right now with free speech and the attacks on it, that's the show for you. Here's my interview with Nico Perrino. All right, well, Nico, thanks for joining the show. Now, you've been hosting the So to Speak podcast for a while, and I was kind of curious, in that time, are you getting a little bit more optimistic about where we are regarding protecting free speech, or are you being a little bit more pessimistic and seeing some of the polls and just talking to people in this field and saying, ugh, I don't like where these things are headed?
Well, I think it's a mix. So when I started the So to Speak podcast, this was April 2016. This was right after the Yale protests of Nicholas Christakis on campus, and amidst the protests at other campuses too. This is the University of Missouri. So free speech was very much in the news, and amongst those of us who care about free speech on campus, we were looking at these protests and seeing some of the demands for speech codes and thinking, we've reached a new era. Fast forward to 2017, February 2nd, 2017, you saw the violence at Berkeley surrounding Milo Yiannopoulos' speech. And then fast forward to the spring of 2017, you saw the incidents at Middlebury with Charles Murray, and you also saw the incident with Heather McDonald at the Claremont schools. And then you saw the evergreen things happening in Washington State surrounding Weinstein. And so at that point, I was thinking, wow, we've transformed from students just demanding censorship to students in 2017 using violence to bring that censorship to fruition, in some cases successfully. Now it's 2018, and it seems as though the campus unrest has quieted down a bit. Sometimes that is a consequence of just the winter break, students being consumed with finals. But sometimes it's a consequence of a real change. We haven't seen any violence on campus in the past couple of months. So I'm cautiously optimistic.
Yeah. Well, that's because that evil Ben Shapiro has not been working the college circuit. Maybe that's why.
Well, yeah, you had of course, the violent protests of Milo Yiannopoulos at Berkeley in February, and then you saw the incidents with Milo Yiannopoulos again at Berkeley at the beginning of the fall semester, and Ben Shapiro, $600,000 in security to have him speak on campus. But yes, you're right. There haven't been these provocateurs like Milo coming to campus, or these conservative commentators like Ben coming to campus in recent. So we might just be in a lull.
Yeah, you ticked off a bunch of stories that are chilling in and of themselves as far as the violence, as far as what's going on campus. Is there one particular incident, maybe even a lesser-known story, that really kind of, I guess, got to you, for lack of a better phrase, and really showed you, oh my, this is, at its worst, this is really awful? And anything that jumps out, or maybe one of those specific instances is the one you kind of point to?
Well, I can think of two different examples, and they are important to me for two different reasons. So the first one goes back to, I believe it's November 2014. Now, don't quote me on that date. Sometime in 2013 or 14 in November, there was a speech by the former police commissioner at Brown. And students came into that speech, shouted it down, and the former police commissioner of New York City was unable to give his speech. And that was really the first time we at FIRE had seen a high-profile student-led drive for censorship. And from there, it started cascading. We saw more calls for disinvitations, more hecklers' vetoes, more demands for things like microaggression policing and bias response teams. And with leading all the way up again to last year when we started seeing actual violence on campus. Now, I worked with FIRE President and CEO Greg Lukianoff on his book, Unlearning Liberty, back in 2012. These student-led drives for censorship did not really exist, or they did not exist in large numbers. It wasn't something we were even thinking about. We don't really even talk about it in the book, and it's almost all we talk about now. And we try and peg it to the incident at Brown with the former police commissioner, Ray Kelly. So that's one incident that sort of continues to stuck out to me as this dawn of a new era. The second is one that's not really political. We tend to think of these free speech controversies, both on and off campus, as culture war controversies. The political left pitted against the political right, or the libertarians or the Green parties, what have you. But at Northern Michigan University last year, the university was expelling people, or I shouldn't say people, students, who are also people, of course, expelling students for talking to their peers about mental health issues. They were feeling depressed, having suicidal thoughts or tendencies, or just having anxiety. And the university said, you can't speak to your peers about these problems. And if you do, we might have to suspend or expel you. They did this on the basis of a debunked an unscientific theory that there would be a contagion effect, that if one depressed person talked to another depressed person about their depression, it would spiral out of control and result in self-harm and suicides. And we spoke with many people who said this is just not the case. The university ended up backing down. There was a DOJ investigation, but it just goes to show that censorship can take many forms. It's not always Milo Yiannopoulos and Ben Shapiro. Sometimes it's just, a young freshman trying to come to grips with college, feeling a little bit depressed, who wants to talk with their friends, but the university said they can't do it lest they get expelled.
Yeah, that's pretty chilling, and I was not aware of that particular story, so I'm glad you brought it up. And as much as I'm sad it exists, but you think that people would want to talk about things, and that's one of the greatest forms of therapy, just to kind of get it off your chest, and that could be the start of a better conversation. But
yeah, not at Northern Michigan University, although I should say they have backtracked. That's no longer their policy, but I believe there is still that DOJ investigation into it.
Thanks. Well, I know you were a creative consultant on Can We Take a Joke, which is a really great documentary. If you haven't seen it yet, watch it ASAP. I know it was on Amazon Prime for a while. It may still be on that service. So wherever you can,
for free.
You can see it, check it out. But, we've had people like Gilbert Gottfried and Adam Carolla be really strong voices for free speech, protecting their fellow comedians. And yet there are a lot of comedians who either don't touch the issue or don't even sort of speak up for themselves. Talk about what's going on from your perspective in the comedy community. Is it a constant worry? Is it overblown? Where do you kind of see it happening right now?
Well, it's a constant worry if you talk to comedians. I have the privilege of living in New York City, just around the block, I should say, a couple of blocks away from the Comedy Cellar, which is one of the world's great comedy clubs, maybe its greatest comedy club. And I go there, and sometimes I have the occasion to actually speak with some of the comedians who perform, and they talk about this being a concern all the time. One wrong joke, when somebody records it, they're not supposed to record it, records it, it goes viral, it could end their careers. Comedians depend in large part upon TV deals, Netflix specials, Comedy Central specials, late night gigs on Seth Meyers or Jimmy Fallon. And if you are a pariah because you happen to hold the wrong opinion, you could lose that Netflix deal, you could lose that Comedy Central spot, and none of them want that. So that's one among many reasons why when you go to a comedy club that's worth its salt, you're not allowed to use your cell phone during it, because comedians, they use these comedy clubs as a practice run for they use it to workshop. It's their easel and canvas, so to speak, where you have a painter who sits behind the scenes and practices their art in the luxury and quiet of their own home. A comedian can really only learn their comedy by going to a comedy club and engaging with an audience. And if you're expected to go to a comedy club and for every joke to be perfect and to hit the right social sensibilities, you almost can never do that. It's just not how the craft works. But we've seen controversies recently with Chappelle and his latest specials and his commentaries on the Me Too movement and transgender rights and the sort of fires that stoked. He has the privilege of being sort of a big name and can weather those storms. And I think the Netflixes of the world are willing to weather them because he brings in a lot of money. But for the lesser known comedian or the comedian who it's a little bit easier to drop, I don't know that that's the case. And that's why we need to give these comedians wide berth to figure out what jokes do and don't work, and also to be the truth tellers that comedians have historically been in society.
Yeah, there's a recent story about James Corden, the Late Late Show host. he apologized for telling Harvey Weinstein jokes at an event, and I'm thinking, maybe the timing could be off. Maybe you could say it's too soon, but it's another example of how sensitive things are. And I'm pretty sure we didn't elect Corden to an office of any kind. He's just a comic, but that's the world we live in now.
Well, if we're talking about entertainment, again, I'm not an expert, but I recently was told a story by a friend of mine, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, but Matt Damon, I think, spoke out about the Me Too movement, and I think he said something along the lines of, not all of these perpetrators are of the same degree. The Harvey Weinsteins perhaps aren't at the same level as the Kevin Spaceys or the Louis C.K.'s. And I guess he was excoriated, or I was told he was excoriated for that.
Yeah, and I didn't think it was very fair because I think he was speaking the truth. I mean, you can't compare what Al Franken did, which is groping, which is obviously inappropriate and wrong, and he lost his gig for it. But you can't compare that to what Harvey Weinstein is alleged to do, which was monstrous and invasive and full-on assault. So, in this climate, I think Matt Damon should have just been quiet, sadly, because he's going to get excoriated by the press. And but that's the world we're living in, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you for the show.
Yeah, but whatever you think about the allegations in these cases, this man was simply expressing an opinion. He wasn't alleged to have engaged in any misconduct, and the culture seems to be, get in line or get out.
Yeah.
It's either you agree with us or you're against us. And he, by all accounts, just seemed to be introducing some concerns, some nuances to the conversation. And he's not going to be blacklisted or anything. And of course, I should add, as a free speech advocate, the response to Matt Damon speaking out is, of course, protected speech. But there is a culture of conformity that is also a concern.
Yeah, I often joke on Twitter when someone says something that's either a little bit inappropriate or not in the lockstep method, I tweet out, apology coming in 3, 2, because that's often the case. And by the way, I think if we're going to, blacklist Matt Damon, it should be for Downsizing, which was probably the worst movie of the year last year. But I digress.
I saw they were doing the full court press on the promotion for that movie, and I saw some of the previews. I never actually saw the movie itself, but you're talking about Twitter. Twitter is one of the most corrosive environments, in my opinion, to engage in free and open dialogue. It's one of the greatest tools for free and open dialogue, but it seems to reward this sort of snarky, witty. There's just no culture of goodwill there, it seems to be. And so what you have are all these commentators, political and otherwise, who try and interpret people's motives as their worst possible motives. Like, their worst possible motive is their only possible motive. And I talk about this all the time on my podcast because this is something Christopher Hitchens coined. And you need to be a little bit more charitable in trying to determine what people's motives are. I just don't see that on Twitter. So I'm not the most interesting Twitter follower.
Well, I agree, although I think we're still it's a very immature mode of communication. So I hope as we grow up around it and with it, we'll get better. But right now, I think we could use a tweak or two, that's for sure. But,
yeah, we'll see.
We're talking with Nico Perrino, host of the So to Speak podcast and the director of communications with FIRE. Nico, I've been reading some polls in the last few months that talk about free speech, and often they're based on college campuses, and it'll say, X amount of students don't believe in hate speech being allowed, and I'm aghast at that. But is that what you're seeing from your FIRE perch, and is it overrated, overblown, or is that really what's going on in campuses where a lot of people think inappropriate speech should be banned?
Yeah, there's been a lot of polls on free speech, both on and off campus in recent months. FIRE put out one of our own that found that a majority of students support disinvitations of some speakers, prohibitions on hate speech, and the like. And you also saw this supported off campus as well. Cato Institute did a survey of their own. We saw something looking at campus free speech and violence through the Brookings Institution. You ask, is this disconcerting? Yes, because I think more people are in support of censorship than I would like. But also, this seems to be in line with what we have seen historically. What we have seen historically is that there is a broad swath of the American public that supports free speech in principle. Once you dig it down into the nitty-gritty, that support tends to fall off. You ask them, do you support the First Amendment right to public rallies on our streets? Yes. Checkbox. Do you support the right of neo-Nazi groups to gather in front of City Hall for a rally? No. So it's once the rubber hits the road, that support tends to fall off. And that's always been the case. If you read Aryeh Neyer's book, he's a former executive director of the ACLU, ran the ACLU during the Nazis and Skokie case, and look at some of the public opinion polls that were happening then. It's same stuff you see today, and some of the same arguments against free speech were happening then. So the more things changed, the more they also stay the same, and I take solace in that in a certain sense.
When I was a little boy, there was I think it was a TV movie called Skokie with Danny Kaye, an older Danny Kaye, and it involved Nazis and free speech. And every time this subject comes up, I think right back to that movie. I don't remember the specifics, but I just remember what the movie was and what it meant in the big picture. And I almost wish they kind of would show it or recreate it or maybe even remake it, because I think that could do some good. The ACLU obviously, in theory, should be hand in hand with FIRE's mission. Is it doing what it can as a group? I mean, I feel like celebrities often celebrate the ACLU from maybe a more partisan point of view, but I don't get the sense that the ACLU is on the front lines like you guys are. Is that? Am I wrong, or what can you share about that?
Well, so we need to keep in mind that there's many different people within the ACLU. There's the state chapters, and there's the national organization, and the national organization coordinates with the state chapters. But the ACLU of Virginia, I mean, they're the ones that came to the defense of the neo-Nazi alt-right, whatever characteristic you want to paint to it. They're the ones that came to the defense of the right of those ralliers to rally. So the ACLU is still doing some very solid work on the free speech front, and we partner with them all the time on campus issues. And they're still a trusted ally to FIRE. And they've long been a trusted ally. I think part of the issue for people on the outside is you don't see where they put you don't see all the cases that they do. Mm-hmm. The stuff dealing with the Trump administration and immigration and women's rights and LGBTQ rights is getting all the attention these days. But these state and local chapters are still doing a bang-up job when it comes to the free speech issue.
Gotcha. That's where my misperception comes in, which is why people should be checking out your podcast. A few weeks ago, I got a chance to interview Josh Brolin. He was doing a movie called Only the Brave, which is very good, by the way, if you haven't checked it out. And in the middle of the conversation, I wanted to ask him about college free speech issues, because I haven't had the chance to do that with a major actor of his caliber. So I asked him very directly, very quickly, and he seemed like a very cool guy. He was answering every question we threw at him, and that one completely stumped him. He wasn't aware of the problem. And he did some tap dancing and tried his best to valiantly answer my question, but it was very clear he had no idea what I was talking about. I'm kind of curious what your take on that is, and what does that mean?
It just means that that's not the world he lives in. So you and I, we talk about free speech and the First Amendment, and your core concern, of course, is Hollywood and the entertainment industry. And you'd like to think that a free speech expert is aware of all the free speech concerns happening in Hollywood, but I'm just not. I'm so consumed with what's happening on campuses and at the Supreme Court that I'm not as aware of the cultural concerns happening in the entertainment industry. And I imagine that's the same with him. His areas of concern are elsewhere, and he's just not aware that's all that's happening on campus. I'm very aware as director of communications for FIRE that there's this tendency to think the issue is larger than it may actually be, or the concerns might be greater than they may actually be, because I'm so immersed in it every day. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I talk to my colleagues about is I know a campus issue has become a big issue when I start getting calls and texts from my family, and they start hearing about them, because it's always an issue for me. I get dozens of emails in my inbox about concerns every day, but it's not always national news.
Well, that's a good kind of sort of test group or focus group. If the family's involved, then it's gotten wet.
Yeah, and I should say my family, they don't work in the nonprofit world. They don't work in politics or civil liberties. They work in the restaurant industry and in the health industry. So that's how I know. If they're following it, then or they're seeing it, then everyone else is seeing it, or many people are.
I think when Jerry Seinfeld spoke out against PC restrictions in the culture, it really kind of caught people off guard because Jerry is as clean as they come. And if a Jerry Seinfeld is kind of aghast at what's going on, it matters. And I think that kind of created a cultural ripple. I was kind of curious from your perspective. I know you're not a Hollywood guru, but if the day came tomorrow, the next day, next week, where a Matt Damon, a George Clooney, a Meryl Streep made a kind of an impassioned speech at an awards show about free speech on campus and how important it is and how vital it is that young people understand it, grasp it, utilize it, and protect it, I think that might move the needle on the debate and on the stuff that you and I talk about. What are your thoughts? Is that pie in the sky thinking, or do you think that could really have a difference?
Well, I'd take a Matt Damon or a Tom Hanks or a Christopher Nolan talking about free speech any day. It doesn't necessarily need to be on campus. Yeah. We see them addressing some issues, First Amendment related issues, in the movies they're working on. I think of Tom Hanks, of course, in The Post. I think of the movie a couple of years ago, Spotlight, about the Boston Globe's investigation of the injustices happening within the Catholic Church in that community. And those did an excellent job of raising awareness of free press concerns. We're still seeing some of the discussions surrounding the Post. But I appreciate Jerry Seinfeld and Chris Rock and that group's discussion of campus free speech issues. I think back in 2015, that was right around the same time we were working on Can We Take a Joke? And it did a lot of good for us in promoting that movie. And Jerry Seinfeld, I think, has done more than many people think to fight for a culture that encourages free and open dialogue. If you just look at some of his credits, he was, I think, director of Colin Quinn's The New York Story, which is a one-man show, I think available now on Netflix, that I saw when it was off Broadway here in New York City. And that's not just a New York story. That's a story. The story that Colin Quinn tells there is a story just of a more candid society. He talks about the New York he grew up in with all the various ethnic communities and how open and diverse and candid these communities were with each other, and how that's sort of gone by the wayside as New York City has gentrified and politically correct culture, for lack of a better phrase, has dug in. So if you haven't seen that, I would highly recommend it, and I highly recommend it to your listeners because it does a good way of addressing the free speech issue from its more sideways cultural perspective.
Well, I'll have a link to that particular show on the show notes page at HollywoodInToto.com. One last question. Are there any plans to do an extension or maybe a sequel or maybe revisit the material that you covered in Can We Take a Joke? Because I think even though the movie is not old, I feel like the culture changes so rapidly, the landscape shifts, and there may be time to revisit it or anything along those lines coming up?
I think Ted Balaker, the director, would be the better person to speak with. Mm-hmm. He is working on some things. I will just say that, okay. But I don't know if I'm at liberty to divulge them.
Okay.
But we are seeing other people trying to explore this subject. Adam Carolla is working on a documentary right now called Unsafe Space, and I believe it's called No Safe Spaces. Mm-hmm. And it's not going to approach it from the comedy angle, but he's got people like Tim Allen and Dennis Prager, California Hollywood people who are working on this issue, talking about this issue, and I'm interested to see what they end up putting out. I don't know if it's coming out this year or next year, but it should be interesting, and it should be within the same category as what we did in Can We Take a Joke?
Well, we'll look forward to that. Well, thank you again, Nico, for joining the HitCast. Please download Nico's Essential Show, so to speak, and check out his other work at FIRE. Just one of the great organizations out there. They're really doing good work, and let more and more people be aware of it and take it to heart because what they're protecting matters very much to all of us. Nico, thanks again, and we'll check in on the road.
All right. Thanks, Christian.
Well, thanks again for listening. Don't forget to check out HollywoodInToto.com for both the show notes and, of course, the latest entertainment news. Please follow me at Twitter at HollywoodInToto. And we'd love it if you leave a podcast review over at iTunes. See you next week.